There are places on Earth that inspire awe with their beauty, others disturb us with their silence. But Mount Shasta, it does both. Rising more than 14,000 feet above sea level, this solitary giant dominates the landscape of Northern California, not just in size, but in presence. It's not just a mountain, it's a mystery, a question carved into the skin of the earth. For centuries, people have whispered stories about this place, about strange lights moving in the sky above it, about ancient cities buried deep within its roots, about beings, not quite human, who still walk its hidden trails. If this is your first time hearing about Mount Shasta, buckle in. You're about to enter one of the most enduring and bizarre legends in modern American folklore, a legend that connects ancient civilizations, lost continents, otherworldly beings, and technologies so advanced they make our science fiction look primitive. Mount Shasta isn't just a mountain, it's a portal, at least according to the thousands of people who claim to have seen, felt, or even entered something beyond ordinary reality here. They speak of Telos, a hidden city beneath the mountain, of the Lemurian, an ancient race said to dwell within, of rituals, disappearances, and secret entrances that only appear to those who are meant to find them. Today, in this story, we'll explore every thread of this astonishing tapestry, from the writings of 19th century mystics to modern hikers who vanished without a trace. From radiant beings in white robes to tales of crystal-lit caverns and underground civilizations. And we'll ask the question that no one can truly answer: what is really hidden beneath Mount Shasta? But before we dive in, consider this. What if even just one part of this legend is true? Let's begin where most stories start, not with truth, but with belief. Long before Atlantis became the symbol of forgotten civilizations, another name echoed in spiritual circles: Lemuria. Unlike Atlantis, which came from Greek texts, Lemuria emerged from a scientific theory in the 19th century to explain how lemurs appeared in both Madagascar and India. The landmass was never found, but the idea of a sunken continent caught fire among mystics and grew into legend. According to this legend, Lemuria was once a vast, peaceful civilization in the Pacific Ocean. Its people were said to be tall, radiant, and spiritually advanced, able to communicate telepathically, manipulate energy, and live in harmony with nature. But one day, catastrophe struck. Whether by natural disaster or spiritual collapse, Lemuria vanished beneath the sea. Not all were lost. Some survivors, guided by intuition or divine purpose, are said to have traveled inland to a towering, isolated mountain in Northern California, Mount Shasta. There, deep within the earth, they built a city, Telos. But Telos was no ordinary refuge. It was a sanctuary of ancient knowledge and a living archive of Lemurian wisdom. Those who claim to have visited describe vast crystal-lit halls, gravity-defying technology, and beings who could vanish at will. They say the Lemurians still live there, hidden, but watching, waiting for humanity to awaken. Why Mount Shasta? Many believe it's a planetary energy vortex, a spiritual gateway linking physical and higher dimensions. Indigenous tribes already considered it sacred. The Lemurians, it seems, chose it for the same reason. Skeptics call it a myth, but from Hawaii to India, stories of a sunken continent filled with advanced beings appear in cultures oceans apart. Too similar, some argue, to dismiss. So, could Telos be more than a legend? Whether real or symbolic, the idea of a lost world beneath Mount Shasta continues to inspire. And for those who still seek hidden truths, the mountain stands quietly, like a keeper of something we may one day remember. In 1883, a teenage boy named Frederick Spencer Oliver was helping his parents mark mining claims near Mount Shasta. It was a routine task, until something completely unexplainable happened. While holding a pen, Oliver's hand suddenly began to move on its own. He wasn't writing, something was writing through him. What followed was a flood of strange, elegant words that spilled across the pages of his journal. Oliver described the experience as terrifying and involuntary. He wasn't thinking, he was channeling. For the next several years, his hand would continue this automatic writing, eventually producing a mysterious manuscript titled A Dweller on Two Planets. But Oliver claimed he wasn't the author. The book, he said, was dictated by a Lemurian spirit who lived beneath Mount Shasta. The text described in elaborate detail an underground city called Telos, its layout, its glowing crystalline energy, its seamless walls, and the cigar-shaped flying crafts used by the Lemurians to travel across realms. And remember, this was decades before airplanes or magnetic trains were invented. Yet the book spoke of anti-gravity devices, electric elevators powered by crystal grids, and a society driven by spiritual technology. To some, these details were too advanced to be coincidence. When Oliver died in 1899, his manuscript remained unpublished. But in 1905, his mother released it, and it sparked a quiet fire among spiritual seekers, esoteric scholars, and early New Age thinkers. Was it fiction, a clever fabrication, or was Oliver really a channel for knowledge from another civilization? We may never know, but his descriptions, gold-plated rooms, tunnels glowing with unnatural light, voices heard through thought alone, still match the testimonies of modern-day mystics who claim to have seen Telos in dreams or meditation. To them, Oliver wasn't inventing a world, he was remembering one. By the 1930s, strange sightings around Mount Shasta were no longer rare. In 1932, a man named Edward Lancer, riding a train near the mountain, saw a blinding light shoot from the southern slope. When he asked the conductor, the response was chilling. "You saw it yourself. The Lemurians are performing their ritual." Intrigued, Lancer returned to investigate. Locals spoke of tall strangers in white robes buying odd supplies like sulfur and pig fat, paying with pure gold, and vanishing without explanation. 8 years later, in 1940, astronomer Edward Larkin reported seeing a massive marble temple through his telescope, grander than anything in Greece. But when he returned to the same coordinates, it was gone. By the 1950s to 1980s, seekers from all over the country began visiting Mount Shasta. Some claimed to have seen glowing figures in the woods. Others reported hearing voices or being healed by unseen forces. One man, after collapsing on a trail in the 1960s, awoke inside a chamber of glowing crystals and soft golden floors. A tall, silent figure stood beside him. The next time he opened his eyes, he was back on the trail. In another tale, campers at Panther Springs in 1970 saw a woman emerge from the woods, bathe silently in freezing water, then disappear without leaving a trace. No evidence, no explanation. Just stories shared in whispers by those who believe they've seen the edges of another world. In 1904, a British prospector named J.C. Brown was exploring the western slopes of Mount Shasta for a mining company. While surveying, he claimed to have found something no map had ever shown, a hidden tunnel carved deep into the mountain. What he found inside, he said, would change everything. Brown described a vast underground world, towering stone statues, chambers lined with glowing crystals, and a long corridor leading to a room filled with mummified giants, some nearly 10 feet tall, dressed in gold and bronze armor. He said the city's walls were engraved with symbols unlike anything he had ever seen. Fearing disbelief, Brown kept his discovery a secret for decades, but in 1934, at the age of 79, he decided to speak out. He gathered a group of 80 people and promised to lead them to the hidden city. The group was ready. A date was set. Supplies were packed. But on the morning of the expedition, J.C. Brown vanished. No trace, no farewell, just silence. Many believe he was silenced by those who wanted the secrets of Telos to stay buried. Others claim he was never real at all. But the most persistent theory, that the Lemurians themselves intervened, closing the entrance, choosing to remain hidden until the world is ready. To this day, no confirmed location of Brown's tunnel has ever been found. And yet, year after year, adventurers still search for it, driven by the hope that maybe, just maybe, the underground city was never just a story. For over a century, stories of the Lemurians have defied logic, science, and time itself. Are they ancient survivors of a lost continent, spiritual guardians of the earth, or simply figments of myth, shaped by our deep longing for connection with something greater? Some believe the Lemurians are interdimensional beings, able to phase in and out of visibility, only appearing when they choose. Others insist they are flesh and blood, living quietly beneath Mount Shasta, their civilization hidden behind a veil of vibration and energy we can't yet perceive. But if their purpose is to guide, not to rule, if they exist not to interfere but to protect, then perhaps their silence is not absence but intention. And that leads us to the most haunting possibility of all. What if Telos, the underground city, is real, but not meant for us? What if it's a mirror of what we could be? A civilization built not on domination, but balance, not on greed, but wisdom. What if it's already waiting beneath our feet, watching and listening, until the day we finally deserve to be let in? You may not believe every story you've just heard, and maybe, to you, the Lemurians are nothing more than folklore. But if even a part of you paused, just for a moment, to wonder, then maybe the mystery of Mount Shasta has already done its job. And if you'd like to continue exploring stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. I'll see you again in the next video.